Blood staining the pristine white tablecloths of the Drake Hotel wasn't on the catering menu. When a hail of bullets shattered the city's most exclusive gala, nobody expected the invisible plus-size waitress to dive into the crossfire. She didn't know the frail old man she shielded was the patriarch of the most ruthless syndicate in Chicago. She just knew he was going to die. That single agonizing moment didn't just leave a bullet in her shoulder, it bound her to the city's deadliest air. Beatrice Gallagher was entirely used to being invisible. In a world that worshipped sharp angles and hollowed cheekbones, Bea took up space. She was a fat woman, and society had long ago taught her that her size was an invitation for people to either look right through her or look at her with thinly veiled disdain. At 26, she had learned to use this invisibility as a shield. It allowed her to move through the crowded, opulent ballroom of the Drake Hotel, unnoticed, balancing a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes with the practiced grace of someone who had spent her life trying not to bump into things. Tonight, Bea was working her third job. By day, she was a grueling, underpaid EMT, riding in the back of ambulances through Chicago's most unforgiving neighborhoods. By night, she moonlighted as a server for elite catering to chip away at the crushing mountain of medical debt left behind by her late mother's battle with cancer. The uniform was a crisp white button-down and black slacks that chafed her thick thighs, the fabric unyielding and hot. Sweat beaded at her hairline, but Bea maintained a polite, placid smile. She navigated the sea of silk dresses and tailored tuxedos, a ghost in a room of billionaires, politicians, and though she didn't know it, yet, monsters. "Keep the flutes full, Gallagher," hissed Richard, the catering manager, as he breezed past her. He didn't even look at her face, his eyes fixed on the VIP table at the center of the room. "And for God's sake, don't hover near the Rossi table. Just pour and retreat. You're blocking the view." Bea bit the inside of her cheek and nodded. She turned her attention to the center table cordoned off by an invisible perimeter of sheer intimidation. Sitting there was Salvatore Rossi. To the untrained eye, he was merely a fragile septuagenarian in a perfectly cut Brioni suit, his silver hair thinning his hands, resting heavily on a polished mahogany cane. But the way the other guests gave his table a wide berth spoke volumes. Beside him sat his son. Dominic Rossi was a man forged from violence and clad in high fashion. Broad-shouldered and lethal, he possessed striking aristocratic features that were hardened by a cold, calculating gaze. His dark eyes scanned the room with the predatory stillness of a wolf watching a flock of sheep. Unlike his father, who wore his power with a quiet, fading dignity, Dominic radiated a terrifying kinetic energy. Bea approached the table, her heart doing a nervous flutter, not from attraction, but from the primal instinct that warned prey to tread lightly around predators. She stepped up to the patriarch's right side, leaning in slightly to refill his water glass. "The veal was a bit dry, don't you think?" "Dom," Salvatore murmured his voice, a raspy whisper that barely carried over the string quartet playing in the corner. "I'll have the chef replaced, Pop," Dominic replied smoothly, not looking at his father. His eyes were fixed on the double doors at the far end of the ballroom. Bear finished pouring and took a step back, trying to shrink her large frame into the shadows. She watched Salvatore dab his mouth with a linen napkin. The old man looked tired. Beneath the expensive suit and the aura of untouchable power, Bea's EMT instincts recognized the pallor of a failing heart, the slight tremor in his hands, the shallow breathing. He wasn't just a VIP, he was a sick old man. "Excuse me, miss," Salvatore said softly, turning his head to look directly at Bea. Bea froze. People in this tax bracket rarely spoke to her. "Yes, sir. Could you bring me a cup of hot tea chamomile if they have it? The champagne gives me acid." He offered a small, unexpectedly kind smile, the skin around his eyes crinkling. "Right away, sir." Bea said, her voice steady, despite the intense, suffocating glare Dominic suddenly aimed at her. The younger Rossi looked at her, as if dissecting a threat, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on her soft, rounded features, before dismissing her entirely as inconsequential. As Bea turned to head back to the kitchen, a strange vibration rippled through the floorboards. It was subtle, barely noticeable over the chatter and the music, but Bea had spent enough time in volatile situations to recognize the shift in the air. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She paused, looking toward the service doors. The first gunshot didn't sound like a gun. It sounded like a heavy wooden pallet being dropped from a great height. Then came the shattering of the massive crystal chandelier, raining shards of glass down onto the dance floor like deadly glittering snow. The string quartet stopped abruptly with a screech of a cello. For one suspended second, the ballroom held its breath. Then the screaming began. 4 men in tactical gear and ski masks burst through the kitchen service doors, bypassing the metal detectors at the front entrance. They held automatic weapons, and their movements were terrifyingly synchronized. This wasn't a robbery. This was a targeted execution. Bea dropped her silver tray. The clatter was lost in the deafening roar of automatic gunfire. "Get down!" someone screamed. Guests stampeded, trampling over each other in a blind panic to reach the exits. Silk-tore heels snapped, and the air filled with the sharp, acrid scent of sulfur and cordite. Bea hit the floor hard, her knees slamming into the polished wood. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the forest of scrambling legs and overturned chairs, Bea's eyes darted to the center table. Dominic Rossi had already flipped the heavy solid oak table onto its side, shoving his father behind it. Dominic drew a sleek black handgun from his tuxedo jacket, returning fire with terrifying precision. He was shouting into a lapel mic, barking orders to bodyguards who were already engaging the assailants. But the hitmen were relentless, and they had a clear objective. 2 of them provided covering fire, pinning Dominic down, while a third flanked the overturned table, moving with deadly speed toward the blind spot where Salvatore was huddled on the floor. Bea was only 10 feet away, crouched behind a marble pillar. She saw the flanker. She saw the laser sight of his rifle paint a red dot across the carpet, creeping steadily toward the old man's chest. Salvatore was clutching his chest, his face pale, paralyzed by what looked to be like the onset of a heart attack. He couldn't move. Dominic was pinned trading fire with the other 2 completely blind to the man flanking them. Bea didn't think. If she had thought about it, she would have realized she was a minimum wage waitress with no ties to these people. She would have realized that her life was worth preserving. But Bea wasn't wired that way. She was an EMT. Her core instinct, honed by years of dragging people out of wrecked cars and overdoses, screamed at her to preserve life. He's just a sick old man, her brain registered. With a surge of adrenaline, Bea threw her heavy body forward. She scrambled out from behind the pillar, moving faster than she ever had in her life. She didn't try to tackle the gunman, she was too far away. Instead, she threw herself directly into the path of the laser sight. She dove over Salvatore Rossi, just as the hitman pulled the trigger. The impact was unlike anything Bea had ever felt. It wasn't a clean piercing. It felt as though she had been struck by a blazing hot sledgehammer. The force of the bullet ripped into her right shoulder, snapping the clavicle and spinning her heavy frame in the air, before she crashed down hard on top of Salvatore. "No!" Dominic's roar tore through the gunfire, a sound of absolute, feral rage. Bea gasped, her vision instantly swimming with black spots. The pain was absolute, radiating down her arm and into her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She felt the warm, sticky flow of blood immediately soaking through her white uniform, pooling onto Salvatore's expensive suit. She looked down at the old man. His eyes were wide with shock, staring up at the large woman who had just blanketed him. Stay down!" Bea sputtered, her voice barely a wet whisper. Her weight was pressing him into the floor, shielding him completely. Above them, Dominic had seen the flanker. In a fluid, lethal motion, he rolled out from cover and put 2 bullets directly into the hitman's skull. The man dropped instantly. Sirens wailed in the distance, a rising crescendo over the dying echoes of gunfire. The remaining assassins, realizing their window was closed, retreated, fleeing back through the kitchen. Suddenly, heavy hands were on Bea, rolling her off Salvatore. She blinked through the agonizing haze to see Dominic Rossi hovering over her. Up close, the terrifying mob boss looked wild, his pristine tuxedo covered in plaster dust, and his own father's blood. Or was it her blood? "Pop, Pop, are you hit?" Dominic yelled, his hands frantically checking the old man. "No," Salvatore gasped, clutching his walking stick. "I'm not. She... Dominic's intense dark eyes snapped to Bea. She was lying on her back, her breath coming in short, rattling gasps. Her right hand was pressed weakly against her shoulder, blood bubbling between her fingers. The look on Dominic Rossi's face shifted from feral rage to absolute shock. He realized instantly what had happened. This woman, this large, unseen, invisible waitress he had dismissed just minutes prior, had thrown her body into the line of fire to save a man she didn't even know. "Medic!" Dominic bellowed, his voice echoing in the ruined ballroom. He dropped to his knees beside Bea, his large, calloused hands pressing down hard on her wound to stem the bleeding. "Hey, look at me!" Bea's eyes fluttered. She felt so cold. The ballroom lights above her were blurring into long streaks of gold and white. "Look at me, damn it!" Dominic ordered, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, commanding rumble that demanded obedience. "What is your name?" "Bea Bayer," she choked out, tasting copper. "Listen to me, Bea," Dominic said, leaning in so close she could smell the gunpowder and expensive cologne on his skin. "You are not going to die today. Do you hear me? I do not allow debts to go unpaid." Bea wanted to nod, but the darkness was rushing in too fast. The pain crested, drowning her in a tidal wave of agony, and she let her eyes close, slipping down into the cold, silent black. The first thing Bea registered was the smell. It wasn't the harsh chemical sting of bleach and antiseptic that she was used to in the overcrowded public hospitals where she worked. This smelled of faint lavender expensive linen and an underlying note of sterile cleanliness that spoke of immense private wealth. She tried to take a deep breath, but a sharp, pulling ache in her upper right chest stopped her short. She groaned, the sound cracking in her dry throat. "Don't move, you'll tear the stitches." The voice came from the shadows of the room, deep, resonant, and unmistakably authoritative. Bea forced her heavy eyelids open. She blinked against the soft, warm light of a bedside lamp. She wasn't in a hospital ward. She was in a bedroom that belonged in a luxury magazine. High ceilings, heavy velvet drapes drawn tightly shut, and a bed that felt like resting on a cloud. An IV line snaked into the back of her left hand, attached to a quiet, state-of-the-art monitor. In the corner of the room, sitting in a winged leather armchair, was Dominic Rossi. He had discarded the ruined tuxedo. He was now wearing a tailored black dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms, heavily inked with dark tattoos. He held a crystal glass of amber liquid, his eyes fixed on her, with an unreadable intensity. "Where?" Bea's voice failed her. Dominic stood, moving with a silent, predatory grace, and poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the nightstand. He held it to her lips, supporting the back of her head, with a surprisingly gentle hand. Bea drank greedily the cool water, soothing her parched throat. "You are at my estate," Dominic said, stepping back and leaning against the bedpost. You've been unconscious for nearly 30 hours. The bullet shattered your right clavicle and tore through some muscle, but it missed the subclavian artery by 2 millimeters. My private surgeon extracted the round. You're going to live, Beatrice. Well, Bea swallowed hard, the memories of the gala rushing back in a terrifying montage of noise, broken glass, and blinding pain. Your father, alive, Dominic said, a muscle feathering in his jaw. Unharmed. Because of you. Bea let her head sink back into the pillows. Good, that's good. Dominic studied her, his dark eyes tracing the soft lines of her face, the messy tangle of her brown hair spread across the pillow, and the generous curve of her body beneath the thin duvet. For the first time in his life, Dominic found himself entirely off balance. In his world, people took bullets for him, because they were paid to, because they were sworn soldiers of the family, or because they feared what he would do to their families if they didn't. But this woman, his men had looked into her while she was under the knife. Beatrice Gallagher, 26, unmarried, working 80-hour weeks between 2 grueling jobs, drowning in over $200,000 of medical debt from her mother's oncology treatments. She lived in a cramped, mold-infested apartment on the South Side. Society had given her nothing but hardship and judgment, specifically for her size and her poverty. Yet when the guns were drawn, she had sacrificed herself for a stranger. Why did you do it? Dominic asked, his voice low, cutting through the silence of the room. You didn't know who we were. You had no obligation. Why jump in front of a bullet for an old man? Bea looked at him, feeling suddenly very small under his piercing gaze despite her size. I'm a paramedic, she whispered, or studying to be a full one. My instinct. He just looked so frail. He reminded me of my mum before she passed. He couldn't move. I could. So I did. Dominic stared at her. The simplicity of her answer felt like a slap. There was no angle, no scheme, just pure, unadulterated selflessness. You saved the Don of the Rossi family, Dominic stated, setting his glass down on the nightstand. The men who attacked us were sent by Carmine Moretti, a rival who wanted to wipe out my bloodline to seize the ports. If that bullet had hit my father, my family would be in a civil war today. Bea's eyes widened, her heart monitor ticking slightly faster. The Mafia, she breathed out, terror finally icing her veins. Yes, Dominic said, plainly, offering no apologies. And because you involved yourself, Carmine's men will have noted you. The police have the security footage, but I had my people wipe your face and name from the hotel's catering logs. Still, the streets talk. If you go back to your apartment, to your ambulance, you are a loose end. Carmine will have you killed just to hurt me. Bea's breath hitched the pain in her shoulder, spiking as panic set in. I can't die. I have bills. I have. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. She had survived the bullet only to be marked for death. What am I supposed to do? Dominic stepped closer to the bed. He reached out his rough thumb, gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The physical contact sent a jolt of electricity through Bea's nervous system. You aren't going to do anything, Dominic said, his voice a low, soothing rumble that left no room for argument. I told you in that ballroom, I do not allow debts to go unpaid. You gave my father his life. In return, I am taking yours. Bea stiffened. What? Relax, Beatrice, he said, a faint, dangerous smile playing on his lips. I mean, I am taking responsibility for it. I have already wired the funds to clear your mother's medical debt. It is gone. Your apartment lease has been terminated, and your belongings are being moved into the east wing of this estate." Bee's jaw dropped. $200,000. You can't just— "I can and I did." Dominic interrupted smoothly. "You cannot return to your old life. You will stay here under my protection until the Moretti problem is permanently erased. You will want for nothing. You are under the absolute protection of the Rossi family now." Bee looked at the terrifying, beautiful man standing over her. She was a fat, exhausted, broke paramedic from the South Side, and a mafia boss had just fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt her reality in the span of 30 seconds. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Clearing the debt is enough to pay me back. You don't have to house me." Dominic looked down at her, his expression hardening into something fiercely protective. He thought about the way the world looked at her, the way even his catering manager had spoken to her. They saw her as invisible a body taking up space. Dominic saw a shield of pure gold, because in my world, loyalty and bravery are the only currencies that matter. Dominic said softly, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "You took a bullet for my blood, Beatrice. That makes you mine to protect. Welcome to the family." Bee's world rapidly contracted to the heavily guarded boundaries of the Rossi estate, a sprawling Gothic limestone mansion completely secluded behind wrought-iron gates and acres of dense old-growth forest on the outskirts of Chicago. For the first 3 weeks, her new reality was a dizzying blur of intense physical therapy, towering arrays of gourmet meals she could barely bring herself to finish, and the lingering, deep-tissue ache radiating from her healing right shoulder. The estate was breathtakingly beautiful, functioning as a fully self-sustaining fortress. There were private chefs, discreet maids, who practically glided across the marble floors, and an army of sharp-suited men patrolling the perimeter with a silent, terrifying vigilance. To Bee, it was a gilded cage. She had spent her entire adult life running on a hamster wheel of exhaustion and poverty, constantly battling the crushing weight of her mother's medical debts and the quiet indignities of living in a body that the world deemed unacceptable. Suddenly, the struggle was entirely gone. Her bank accounts showed zero balances in the debt columns, and an astonishing trust fund had been established in her name. Yet the sheer inactivity was driving her slowly mad. Dominic Rossi was a phantom during those initial weeks. Bee learned through the estate's incredibly tight-lipped staff that he was out dismantling the Moretti syndicate piece by bloody piece. He was ensuring that the men who had dared to attack his father and inadvertently struck Bee paid the ultimate price. But even in his physical absence, his intense, brooding presence permeated every single stone of the mansion. One afternoon, late in the 4th week of her recovery, Bee was sitting in the estate's vast, sun-drenched conservatory. She wore a loose, flowing, emerald-green silk robe that the staff had left in her armoire. The luxurious fabric draped softly over her generous curves, a stark contrast to the stiff, scratchy polyester uniforms she was used to wearing. She was reading a paperback thriller, trying to ignore the way the armed guards outside the glass walls kept sweeping the tree line. "The green suits you, Beatrice. It brings out the warmth in your eyes." Bee jumped, her good hand instinctively clutching the lapels of her robe. She turned to see Salvatore Rossi, standing in the arched doorway. The aging Don looked markedly better than he had on the night of the gala. The grey pallor had left his cheeks, and he leaned less heavily on his polished mahogany cane. He wore a soft cashmere cardigan and a warm, grandfatherly smile that seemed entirely at odds with his reputation as the most feared man in the Midwest. "Mr. Rossi," Bea said, scrambling to her feet, wincing slightly as her shoulder pulled. Sit, please." Salvatore insisted, waving a hand dismissively as he crossed the room and settled into a wicker armchair opposite her. "In this house, You do not stand for me. In fact, nobody in this family will ever look down on you. You gave me the greatest gift a person can give. You gave me time. Bea blushed, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. I just reacted, sir. Any paramedic would have done the same. Do not diminish your bravery, Salvatore said firmly, his raspy voice carrying an undeniable weight. My son tells me you are restless. He says you have asked to return to your job. Bea looked down at her hands, twisting the silk fabric. I'm a worker, Mr. Rossi. I'm used to pulling double shifts, being on the move, helping people. Sitting around here, it feels wrong. It feels like I'm taking advantage of your charity, and I've never been someone who takes charity. Plus, I don't belong in a place like this. I'm just... She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to her plus-size frame and her makeup-free face, acutely aware of how vastly out of place she looked in this billionaire's sanctuary. Salvatore's eyes softened with profound understanding. You think you do not belong because of how you look, because of where you come from. He leaned forward, resting his gnarled hands on the handle of his cane. Beatrice, the people who usually sit in these rooms are hollow. They are beautiful. Yes, but they are empty. They would sell their own mothers for a sliver of power. You possess a soul of pure, unyielding iron. You are exactly the kind of person who belongs here. Before Bea could process the immense compliment, heavy rhythmic footsteps echoed in the marble hallway. The temperature in the conservatory seemed to plummet as Dominic strode into the room. He looked exhausted and infinitely dangerous. He wore a dark, tailored suit, but the tie was gone and his collar was unbuttoned. Faint spatters of something dark and ominous stained the pristine white cuff of his right sleeve. "Pop," Dominic said, nodding respectfully to his father, before turning his dark, piercing gaze entirely onto Bea. The intensity of his stare made her breath hitch. It was the look of a predator returning to its den to check on its prize. "Beatrice, you are looking better." "I feel better," Bea managed to say, her heart executing a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Salvatore slowly pushed himself up from the chair. "I will leave you two. I need to rest before dinner. Beatrice, remember what I said." The old man gave her a gentle pat on her uninjured shoulder and slowly made his way out of the conservatory, leaving a thick electric tension in his wake. Dominic watched his father leave before turning back to Bea. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of rain-expensive tobacco and a sharp metallic scent that made Bea's EMT instincts scream. "You asked my men to bring you your medical textbooks," Dominic stated, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "It wasn't a question." "I have exams coming up," Bea replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I still want to get my full paramedic certification. Just because you paid off my mother's debt doesn't mean my life stops, Dominic." It was the first time she had used his first name. Dominic's eyes flared, a dark spark igniting in the depths of his irises. "Your life as you knew it has stopped," he corrected her, his tone absolute. "Carmine Moretti is dead. I put a bullet in his skull 3 hours ago." Bea gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The casual confession of a brutal murder right in front of her shattered the illusion of the peaceful conservatory. You killed him." "I executed him," Dominic clarified coldly. "He broke the peace, and he nearly cost my father his life. More importantly, he forced you to take a bullet that was meant for my blood. His entire syndicate is currently being dismantled. The threat to you is over. You are no longer a target." Bea felt a dizzying mix of relief and profound horror. "So, I can go home." Dominic's expression hardened instantly. The air around him seemed to crackle with a sudden dark possessiveness. He closed the remaining distance between them, standing so close that Bea had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently but firmly cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, a startlingly tender gesture from a man whose hands were literally stained with blood. "You can leave the estate," Dominic said softly, his dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away every defense she had. "But you will not return to that mold-infested apartment. You will not return to a life where you are overworked, underpaid, and entirely unseen. I will not allow it." "You don't own me," Bea whispered, though her body betrayed her, leaning involuntarily into the warmth of his hand. "No," Dominic agreed, a dangerous, breathtaking smile slowly spreading across his lips. "But I protect what is mine. And whether you are ready to accept it or not, Beatrice, you belong to the Rossi family now. You belong to me." The transition from a highly guarded, protected asset to something intimately, dangerously entangled with the Mafia boss began to crystallize during the Rossi family's annual autumn gala. It had been exactly 2 months since the shooting. Bea's shoulder was fully healed, leaving behind a jagged pink scar that she viewed as an ugly reminder, but which Dominic seemed to treat with a quiet, terrifying reverence. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the estate, a sprawling space that rivaled the Drake Hotel in its sheer, uncompromising opulence. It was a gathering of the family's top capos, legitimate political allies, and the various sycophants who orbited the Rossi empire. Dominic had insisted that Bea attend. He had gone so far as to commission a world-renowned designer to create a custom gown specifically for her. Bea stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her suite, staring at the woman reflected back at her. She didn't recognize herself. The dress was a masterpiece of deep midnight blue velvet. It was engineered perfectly to her plus-size body, hugging her waist, supporting her heavy bust, and flowing elegantly over her wide hips. It didn't try to hide her size. It celebrated it, framing her curves like a piece of Renaissance art. Her thick brown hair was swept up in an elegant loose chignon, and subtle expert makeup highlighted her large hazel eyes and full lips. For the first time in her 26 years, Bea Gallagher did not feel invisible. She felt undeniably, terrifyingly beautiful. When she finally descended the grand, sweeping staircase into the ballroom, the effect was immediate. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The usual whispers of the Chicago elite paused as they took in the striking, curvaceous woman who was suddenly moving through their fiercely guarded world. Dominic was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a bespoke charcoal tuxedo that fit his broad, muscular frame to perfection. When he looked up and saw her, the cold, calculating mask of the Don slipped completely. His breath hitched visibly, and a look of such intense possessive hunger flashed in his eyes that Bea's knees nearly buckled. He offered his hand. She took it. The moment their fingers interlocked, the power dynamic in the room fundamentally shifted. He didn't just escort her. He claimed her, pulling her firmly to his side, his hand resting intimately on the curve of her lower back. "You look," Dominic murmured, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "Magnificent. I will have to blind half the men in this room." Bea laughed nervously, the sound vibrating against his chest. "Thank you. And thank you for the dress. I've never owned anything so beautiful. It pales in comparison to the woman wearing it," he stated matter-of-factly, guiding her through the sea of guests. However, not everyone in the room viewed Bea's elevation with awe. The Rossi family had many allies, but they also had internal rivalries. Enter Camilla Viti. Camilla was the daughter of the family's top earner in the shipping ports. She was striking in a harsh, angular way, stick-thin, draped in silver silk, with a face that had seen more plastic surgeons than smiles. For years she had been heavily positioning herself to become Dominic's wife, viewing it as a necessary corporate merger. As Dominic stepped away briefly to speak with a state senator, Camilla materialized beside Bea like a beautifully dressed viper. "So you're the famous human shield?" Camilla purred her eyes, raking over Bea's velvet-clad body with overt, undisguised disdain. She took a sip of her champagne, her heavily glossed lips curving into a cruel sneer. "I must say, Dominic's charity projects are usually far less bulky." Bea stiffened, the old familiar sting of body shaming hitting her like a physical blow. Her posture dropped, and the radiant confidence she had felt minutes ago began to fracture. "Excuse me." "Oh, don't play stupid," Camilla whispered, stepping closer. "You think because he dressed you up you actually belong here? You're a peasant, a morbidly obese waitress who got lucky by getting in the way of a bullet. Dominic pities you. He feels obligated to you. But a man like him, he requires a queen, not a heavy, uncultured charity case taking up too much space." The words cut deep, tearing open years of insecurities that Bea had desperately tried to heal. She felt the tears pricking the corners of her eyes and took a step back, wanting nothing more than to flee the room, to run back to her safe, lonely suite. "Camilla." The single word cut through the air like a cracking whip. The ambient noise in their immediate vicinity instantly died. Dominic stood directly behind Camilla, his face a terrifying mask of absolute, unadulterated fury. The aura of violence radiating from him was so palpable that the surrounding guests practically scrambled backward to give them space. Camilla whipped around, her cruel smirk vanishing, replaced by sudden, stark terror. Dominic, I was just making conversation with your guest." "You were speaking," Dominic corrected his voice, a lethal frozen whisper that carried perfectly in the suddenly silent room. "And you were breathing my air while disrespecting the woman who saved my father's life." "I didn't mean, shut your mouth," Dominic snapped, stepping forward so he physically dominated the space, forcing Camilla to cower. He didn't yell. The quietness of his rage made it infinitely worse. "Let me make this perfectly clear to you, Camilla, and to everyone else listening. Beatrice is not a guest. She is the savior of the Rossi bloodline. She possesses more courage, loyalty, and beauty in her little finger than you could ever hope to manufacture." Camilla was trembling violently now, her silver dress shaking. Dominic's dark eyes swept the room, taking in his capos, his soldiers, and his allies. "Beatrice Gallagher is under my ultimate protection. An insult to her is a direct, unforgivable insult to me. If anyone in this room ever looks at her with anything less than absolute reverence, I will personally remove their eyes. Are we entirely understood?" A unified, terrified murmur of assent swept through the crowd. "Get out of my house, Camilla," Dominic ordered softly, "before I forget my manners." Camilla practically sprinted for the exit, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face, humiliated and banished. Dominic turned his attention entirely back to Bea. The monstrous rage vanished instantly, replaced by a profound, urgent tenderness. He stepped up to her, completely ignoring the hundreds of people watching them, and gently cupped her face in both of his large hands. "Look at me, Beatrice," he commanded gently, using his thumbs to wipe away the single tear that had escaped her eye. Bea looked up, her heart hammering, completely overwhelmed by the terrifying public display of devotion he had just laid at her feet. "Dominic, you didn't have to cause a scene. I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone make you feel small." Dominic vowed, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded dangerously close to love. "You are not too big, Beatrice. You are magnificent. You are exactly the right size to hold my dark, wretched soul." He didn't wait for her response. In front of the entire Chicago underworld, Dominic Rossi leaned down and captured her lips. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, consuming claim. It was an explosion of heat and suppressed desire. Bea gasped against his mouth, and Dominic deepened the kiss, his hands pulling her plush-curved body flush against his hard, muscular frame. The ballroom erupted into applause, led enthusiastically by Salvatore Rossi, who watched from his table with a wide grin. But Bea didn't hear them. Her world narrowed entirely to the taste of champagne and danger on Dominic's lips. The invisible wallflower was dead. In her place, forged in gunfire and velvet, a mafia queen had just awakened. The kiss in the ballroom was not merely a public declaration. It was the catalyst that permanently fused Beatrice Gallagher to the very spine of the Rossi syndicate. In the weeks that followed, the sprawling limestone mansion transformed from a gilded cage into her absolute domain. Dominic did not hide her away in the East Wing, like a fragile, heavily guarded secret. Instead, he systematically integrated her into the terrifying high-stakes fabric of his world. He insisted she sit beside him during closed-door meetings in the soundproofed mahogany study, her presence a silent, immovable testament to his unyielding devotion. Bea, far from shrinking back into the invisible wallflower she had once been, began to genuinely thrive. Her years as an exhausted, underpaid paramedic had trained her to remain brilliantly calm under extreme pressure to process trauma and complex logistics with clinical, unapologetic precision. She traded her velvet evening gowns for sharply tailored, custom-made wool pantsuits that accentuated her generous curves while projecting an aura of untouchable commanding authority. Dominic bought her the clothes, but Bea owned the room. To keep her mind sharp, she began reviewing the family's legitimate pharmaceutical and medical supply holdings. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar front that imported hospital equipment through the Chicago shipping ports. Given her extensive background in emergency medicine, the ledgers read like a second language to her. It was on a freezing Tuesday in late November, with the harsh wind whipping off Lake Michigan and rattling the bulletproof glass of the study, that Bea found the discrepancy. She was cross-referencing a batch of shipping manifests from the previous 6 months when she noticed a glaring, repeated anomaly. Large shipments of high-grade surgical titanium and oxygen tanks were being flagged as damaged in transit and routed to a secondary warehouse in the Fulton Market District before officially hitting the hospital distribution centers. The authorization signature on every single redirected crate belonged to Leo Russo. Leo was Dominic's underboss. He was a brutally efficient, sharply dressed man with cold, flat eyes and an overly smooth smile who had served the family for 2 decades. Bea's heart performed a slow, heavy thud against her ribcage. She pulled up the inventory weights. Oxygen tanks and surgical steel were incredibly heavy. If you emptied a crate, you could fill it with something else of equal weight to bypass the automated customs scales, something like automatic weapons. A cold dread washed over her. The attack at the Drake Hotel that had nearly killed Salvatore Rossi had been executed by Carmine Moretti's men, but the tactical precision of that hit meant they had inside information. They knew exactly how many guards Salvatore had, where the metal detectors were placed, and what time Dominic would be distracted. Leo Russo was the one who had organized the hotel security detail that night. "You are frowning, Beatrice. It means you are either hungry or you have found a problem I need to shoot." Dominic's deep voice broke her concentration. He was standing in the doorway of the study, a dark wool overcoat draped over his broad shoulders, fresh snow melting in his dark hair. The sheer magnetic pull she felt toward him had only intensified over the past month. Bea hesitated, her fingers hovering over the leather-bound ledger. Accusing the underboss of the Rossi family of high treason was essentially signing a death warrant. If she was wrong, it would cause a devastating fracture in the syndicate. "It's nothing," Bay lied, smoothly closing the ledger. Just tired eyes. The numbers are blurring. Dominic stepped into the room, his predatory instincts immediately flaring. He knew her too well now. He crossed the Persian rug, leaned over the heavy oak desk, and framed her face with his cold, large hands. He kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment. "Do not lie to me, mia regina." "What did you find?" Before Bear could answer, a frantic knocking echoed from the hallway. The heavy double door swung open, and Leo Russo stepped in, his expression tight, a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead, despite the winter chill. "Dom, we have a situation at the harbor," Leo said urgently, intentionally avoiding B's gaze. "The feds are executing a surprise raid on Pier 41. They have a warrant for the imported crates. If they open them, we are buried." Dominic's eyes hardened into chips of black ice. The romantic tenderness vanished, replaced instantly by the lethal calculating Don. "How did they get a warrant? We own the judge in that district." "I don't know," Leo insisted, stepping back into the hallway. "But my car is running. We have to go now and scrub the warehouse before the FBI tactical team breaches the perimeter." "Wait," B said sharply, standing up. Her medical instincts were screaming at her. The timing was entirely too convenient. The Fulton Market crates the security detail, the sudden raid. "Dominic, don't go. Let your lawyers handle the harbor." Leo shot B a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "With all due respect, Miss Gallagher, this is family business. We don't have time to hold your hand right now. Dom, we have 3 minutes." Dominic looked between B and Leo. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. He trusted B with his life, but Leo was a 2-decade veteran of the family. "Stay here, Beatrice. Keep the guards on high alert. I will handle this." Dominic turned and followed Leo out of the study. B listened to the heavy thud of the front doors closing. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her lungs. She ripped the ledger open again. The Fulton Market warehouse wasn't just a drop point. It was a trap. She grabbed her phone and dialed the estate's head of security. But the line was entirely dead. The estate's jammer had been activated from the inside. Leo hadn't just organized the hit at the Drake Hotel. He was finishing the job today. B didn't wait. She grabbed her heavy winter coat from the rack, slipped a small pearl-handled derringer, a gift Dominic had forced her to learn how to use, into her deep pocket, and sprinted for the rear garage. She wasn't going to let Dominic walk into an execution. She had taken a bullet for his father. She would happily take the entire world on for him. The abandoned meatpacking facility in the Fulton Market district smelled of rust, old blood, and damp concrete. B parked her black SUV 2 blocks away, moving through the alleyways with a surprising, deadly silence. The bitter Chicago wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks, but she barely felt the cold. Adrenaline, hot and heavy, pumped through her veins. As she crept toward the rusted loading dock doors, she heard the unmistakable, terrifying echo of a physical beating. B peered through a grimy, shattered window pane. Inside the cavernous warehouse, lit only by a few swinging industrial bulbs, was a nightmare. 3 of Leo's loyal men were circling the center of the room. In the middle, kneeling on the frozen concrete, was Dominic. He was bleeding heavily from a gash on his forehead. His overcoat discarded his hands, bound tightly behind his back with industrial zip ties. Standing over him was Leo Russo, holding a heavy steel crowbar. "You got soft, Dom," Leo sneered, pacing around the kneeling boss. "The minute you brought that fat, bleeding heart paramedic into the house, I knew the Rossi family was finished. You stopped prioritizing the empire. You started playing house. Moretti offered me the entire Southside distribution ring if I gave him your father. Since that didn't work, I'm just going to take the whole damn crown myself." Dominic spat a mouthful of blood onto the concrete, his eyes burning with a dark, demonic fury that promised absolute destruction. You are a dead man, Leo. You will not leave this city alive. I will rip your heart out through your teeth." "Big words from a man tied to a chair." Leo laughed, raising the crowbar. "I'll make sure to send your little girlfriend a piece of you in the mail." Bea didn't think. Just as she had done at the Drake Hotel months ago, her body moved before her brain could calculate the risk. But this time, she wasn't a civilian, throwing herself blindly into the crossfire. She was the Rossi Queen, and she was armed. Bea kicked the rusted side door open. The crash echoed like thunder in the warehouse. All 4 men whipped around. Before Leo's soldiers could raise their weapons, Bea planted her feet, aimed the small derringer with both hands, and pulled the trigger. The first shot hit the soldier closest to Dominic, squarely in the kneecap. The man shrieked, collapsing instantly, his bones shattered. The element of surprise gave Bea exactly 2 seconds. "Beatrice, run!" Dominic roared, struggling violently against his bindings, but Bea charged forward. The sheer momentum of her heavy, powerful body was a weapon in itself. She slammed full force into the second soldier, just as he raised his automatic rifle. The impact threw them both onto the concrete. The soldier scrambled to push her off, but Bea used her weight, driving her knee ruthlessly into his sternum, cracking his ribs before bringing the butt of her heavy gun down onto his temple in a sickening crunch. The man went entirely limp. "You stupid bitch!" Leo screamed, pulling a handgun from his waistband and aiming it squarely at Bea's chest. He fired. The bullet grazed Bea's upper arm, ripping through her coat and searing her skin like a hot iron. She gasped, stumbling backward, the derringer clattering out of her grasp. Leo grinned a manic, desperate look in his eyes. He stepped toward her, raising the gun to finish the job. "I'm going to enjoy this." He didn't see Dominic move. Using the distraction Bea had provided, Dominic had maneuvered his bound wrists over a jagged, broken piece of rebar sticking out of a concrete pillar, violently sawing the thick plastic zip ties. With a feral, terrifying roar, the ties snapped. Before Leo could pull the trigger, Dominic launched himself across the floor like a massive, striking panther. He hit Leo with the force of a freight train. The handgun skittered away into the darkness. Dominic didn't just beat Leo, he dismantled him. His large fists rained down on the traitor with a blinding, mechanical brutality. Bones snapped. Blood sprayed across the frozen floor. Dominic was a force of pure, unchecked violence, exacting his vengeance for the betrayal, and more importantly, for the blood blooming on Bea's sleeve. "Dominic, stop!" Bea yelled, scrambling to her feet and rushing toward him. "He's done, you're going to kill him!" Dominic ignored her, his fist raised for a lethal blow to Leo's crushed face. "Dom, look at me." Bea grabbed his broad shoulder, her strong grip pulling him back. "He's not worth dirtying your hands anymore. We have what we need." Dominic froze. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his knuckles split and bleeding. He looked down at the ruined, unconscious body of his former underboss, then slowly turned his dark eyes to Bea. He saw the tear in her coat, the blood seeping through the fabric, the rage drained out of him, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering panic. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You came for me," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking entirely stripped of his terrifying mob boss persona. "You foolish, brave, beautiful woman. You could have been killed." "I told you," Bea murmured, wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling the solid, frantic beat of his heart against hers. "I protect what is mine." 6 months later, the Chicago underworld was entirely unified under a new regime. With Leo Russo and the Moretti Syndicate eradicated, the Rossi family reigned unchallenged. The spring sun bathed the estate in a warm, golden glow. Bea stood on the sweeping stone balcony overlooking the private gardens. She wore a stunning custom-made white silk gown that draped flawlessly over her generous curves, a massive, flawless diamond resting heavy on her left ring finger. Dominic stepped onto the balcony, wrapping his arms around her waist, from behind, pressing his chest against her back. He kissed the sensitive skin below her ear, a gesture of absolute, unyielding worship. "The capos are waiting in the study, Mrs. Rossi." Dominic murmured his voice, a dark, velvety rumble. "They will not start the financial meeting without their queen." Bea smiled, leaning back into the heat of her husband's body. The invisible, overworked wallflower was dead. She had taken a bullet for a frail old man, and in return had inherited a kingdom. She turned her head, capturing his lips in a slow, commanding kiss. "Then let's not keep our empire waiting." Did the terrifying twists of Beatrice and Dominic's mafia romance keep you on the absolute edge of your seat? From an invisible, hard-working paramedic to the commanding queen of the Chicago underworld, Bea proved that true strength and beauty come from unwavering courage, not societal standards. If you loved this intense, action-packed story of loyalty, betrayal, and dark romance, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode.